Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is November 13, 2025, and a few days ago I put up a poll on the Posts tab at YouTube, formerly known as the Community tab, which asked the following: true or false? Foundational Marxist-Leninist principles state that communist parties must conduct thorough and persistent outreach and informational efforts among the militaries of all capitalist countries, even using illegal methods if communist organizing is legally suppressed, attempting to form communist units within them. We got a good turnout, almost 5,000 people participated, so thank you. And the results were that 67%, or exactly 2/3, said that the statement is true, 7% said that it's false, and 27% said they didn't know. The answer is true, so congratulations to 2/3 of the respondents. What I said in the pinned comment is, doing communist work in the militaries was one of the requirements written by Lenin for parties applying for membership in the Third Communist International, or Comintern. The Comintern was set up to Bolshevize parties that had been members in the collapsing Second International and to pull them away from the Kautskyite opportunism and anti-revolutionary policies which had dominated, unfortunately, the Second International. And for more on Kautskyism and the opportunism of the Second International and why it collapsed, see the Basic Marxism-Leninism Study Guide playlist linked in the video description. A number of the texts in the middle section of that playlist cover this. Anyway, to this end, Lenin developed a list of requirements to differentiate the communist parties from the reformist ones. We already have on the channel as an audiobook the draft Terms of Admission into the Communist International written by Lenin, and in fact, item 4 of those requirements reads as follows: persistent and systematic propaganda and agitation must be conducted in the armed forces, and communist cells formed in every military unit. In the main, communists will have to do this work illegally. Failure to engage in it would be tantamount to a betrayal of their revolutionary duty and incompatible with membership in the Third International. So that's the draft text. The actual final adopted text had 21 instead of 19 items, and they became known simply as the 21 conditions. So in the final version, that point became: the duty of propagating communist ideas includes the special obligation of forceful and systematic propaganda in the army. Where this agitation is interrupted by emergency laws, it must be continued illegally. Refusal to carry out such work would be tantamount to a betrayal of revolutionary duty and would be incompatible with membership of the Communist International. We can also add 2 additional points from the 21 conditions, which contain directives for communists as regards the military. Point 8 says, a particularly marked and clear attitude on the question of the colonies and oppressed nations is necessary on the part of the communist parties of those countries whose bourgeoisies are in possession of colonies and oppress other nations. Every party that wishes to belong to the Communist International has the obligation of exposing the dodges of its, quote, own imperialists in the colonies, of supporting every liberation movement in the colonies not only in words but in deeds, of demanding that their imperialist compatriots should be thrown out of the colonies, of cultivating in the hearts of the workers in their own country a truly fraternal relationship to the working population in the colonies and to the oppressed nations, and of carrying out systematic propaganda among their own country's troops against any oppression of colonial peoples. And point 14 reads, every party that wishes to belong to the Communist International has the obligation to give unconditional support to every Soviet republic in its struggle against the forces of counter-revolution. The communist parties must carry out clear propaganda to prevent the transport of war material to the enemies of the Soviet republics. They must also carry out legal or illegal propaganda, etc., with every means at their disposal among troops sent to stifle workers' republics. So I was really heartened to see that 2/3 of people got that right, and only 1 in 14 got it definitely wrong. And it's also good to see people saying they don't know when they don't know. And now let's take this opportunity to read the full text of the 21 conditions, which can be found in the minutes of the Second Congress of the Communist International, 7th session. And it reads, Theses on the Conditions of Admission to the Communist International. The First Congress of the Communist International did not draw up precise conditions for admission to the Communist International. Until the time the First Congress was convened, there were, in most countries, only communist trends and groups. The Second Congress of the Communist International meets under different conditions. At the present time, there are in most countries not only communist trends and tendencies, but communist parties and organizations. Now, parties and groups often turn to the Communist International, which quite recently belonged to the Second International, which wished to join the Communist International, but which have not in fact become communist. The Second International has been finally smashed to pieces. The parties in between and the so-called center groups, which realize the hopelessness of the Second International, now try to lean upon the Communist International, which is becoming more and more powerful. In the process, however, they hope to retain a quote-unquote autonomy that will permit them to continue their previous opportunist or centrist policies. To a certain extent, the Communist International is becoming fashionable. The desire of certain leading centrist groups to join the Communist International is an indirect confirmation of the fact that the Communist International has gained the sympathy of the overwhelming majority of class-conscious workers all over the world, and that it is becoming a force that grows more powerful each day. The Communist International is threatened by the danger of being watered down by elements characterized by vacillation and half-measures, which have not yet finally discarded the ideology of the Second International. Moreover, to this very day, there remains in some big parties, Italy, Sweden, Norway, Yugoslavia, among others, whose majorities have adopted the standpoint of communism, a significant reformist and social pacifist wing, which is only waiting for the opportunity to raise its head again, to start active sabotage of the proletarian revolution and thus to help the bourgeoisie and the Second International. Not a single communist may forget the lessons of the Hungarian Soviet Republic. The fusion of the Hungarian communists with the so-called left Social Democrats cost the Hungarian proletariat dearly. Consequently, the Second Congress of the Communist International considers it necessary to establish quite precisely the conditions for the admittance of new parties and to point out to those parties that have been admitted to the Communist International the duties incumbent on them. The Second Congress of the Communist International lays down the following conditions of membership of the Communist International. 1. All propaganda and agitation must bear a really communist character and correspond to the program and decisions of the Communist International. All the party's press organs must be run by reliable communists who have proved their devotion to the cause of the proletariat. The dictatorship of the proletariat must not be treated simply as a current formula learned off by heart. Propaganda for it must be carried out in such a way that its necessity is comprehensible to every simple worker, every woman worker, every soldier and peasant from the facts of their daily lives, which must be observed systematically by our press and used day by day. The periodical and other press and all the party's publishing institutions must be subordinated to the party leadership, regardless of whether, at any given moment, the party as a whole is legal or illegal. The publishing houses must not be allowed to abuse their independence and pursue policies that do not entirely correspond to the policies of the party. In the columns of the press, at public meetings, in the trades unions, in the cooperatives, wherever the members of the Communist International can gain admittance, it is necessary to brand not only the bourgeoisie but also its helpers, the reformists of every shade, systematically and pitilessly. 2. Every organization that wishes to affiliate to the Communist International must regularly and methodically remove reformists and centrists from every responsible post in the labor movement. Party organizations, editorial boards, trades unions, parliamentary factions, cooperatives, local government, and replace them with tested communists, without worrying unduly about the fact that, particularly at first, ordinary workers from the masses will be replacing quote-unquote experienced opportunists. 3. In almost every country in Europe and America, the class struggle is entering the phase of civil war. Under such conditions, the communists can place no trust in bourgeois legality. They have the obligation of setting up a parallel organizational apparatus which, at the decisive moment, can assist the party to do its duty to the revolution. In every country where a state of siege or emergency laws deprive the communists of the opportunity of carrying on all their work legally, it is absolutely necessary to combine legal and illegal activity. 4. The duty of propagating communist ideas includes the special obligation of forceful and systematic propaganda in the army. Where this agitation is interrupted by emergency laws, it must be continued illegally. Refusal to carry out such work would be tantamount to a betrayal of revolutionary duty and would be incompatible with membership of the Communist International. 5. Systematic and methodical agitation is necessary in the countryside. The working class will not be able to win if it does not have the backing of the rural proletariat and at least a part of the poorest peasants, and if it does not secure the neutrality of at least a part of the rest of the rural population through its policies. Communist work in the countryside is taking on enormous importance at the moment. It must be carried out principally with the help of revolutionary communist workers of the town and country who have connections with the countryside. To refuse to carry this work out, or to entrust it to unreliable, semi-reformist hands, is tantamount to renouncing the proletarian revolution. 6. Every party that wishes to belong to the Communist International has the obligation to unmask not only open social patriotism, but also the insincerity and hypocrisy of social pacifism, to show the workers systematically that without the revolutionary overthrow of capitalism, no international court of arbitration, no agreement on the limitation of armaments, no quote-unquote democratic reorganization of the League of Nations, which was the predecessor to the United Nations, will be able to prevent new imperialist wars. 7. The parties that wish to belong to the Communist International have the obligation of recognizing the necessity of a complete break with reformism and centrist politics and of spreading this break among the widest possible circles of their party members. Consistent communist politics are impossible without this. The Communist International unconditionally and categorically demands the carrying out of this break in the shortest possible time. The Communist International cannot tolerate a situation where notorious opportunists, as represented by Turati, Modigliani, Kautsky, Hilferding, Hillquit, Longuet, MacDonald, etc., have the right to pass as members of the Communist International. This could only lead to the Communist International becoming something very similar to the wreck of the Second International. 8. A particularly marked and clear attitude on the question of the colonies and oppressed nations is necessary on the part of the communist parties of those countries whose bourgeoisies are in possession of colonies and oppress other nations. Every party that wishes to belong to the Communist International has the obligation of exposing the dodges of its quote, own imperialists in the colonies, of supporting every liberation movement in the colonies not only in words but in deeds, of demanding that their imperialist compatriots should be thrown out of the colonies, of cultivating in the hearts of the workers in their own country a truly fraternal relationship to the working population in the colonies and to the oppressed nations, and of carrying out systematic propaganda among their own country's troops against any oppression of colonial peoples. 9. Every party that wishes to belong to the Communist International must systematically and persistently develop communist activities within the trades unions, workers and works councils, the consumer cooperatives, and other mass workers' organizations. Within these organizations, it is necessary to organize communist cells which are to win the trades unions, etc., for the cause of communism by incessant and persistent work. In their daily work, the cells have the obligation to expose everywhere the treachery of the social patriots and the vacillations of the so-called centrists. The communist cells must be completely subordinated to the party as a whole. 10. Every party belonging to the Communist International has the obligation to wage a stubborn struggle against the Amsterdam quote-unquote international of yellow trade union organizations. Comment, these were reformist trade unions organized around social democratic principles, and they were against workers' revolution. Continuing, it must expound as forcefully as possible among trades unionists the idea of the necessity of the break with the yellow Amsterdam International. It must support the International Association of Red Trades Unions affiliated to the Communist International, at present in the process of formation, with every means at its disposal. 11. Parties that wish to belong to the Communist International have the obligation to subject the personal composition of their parliamentary factions to review, to remove all unreliable elements from them, and to subordinate these factions to the party leadership, not only in words but also in deeds, by calling on every individual communist member of parliament to subordinate the whole of their activity to the interests of really revolutionary propaganda here used in the neutral sense of something trying to propagate something, and agitation. 12. The parties belonging to the Communist International must be built on the basis of the principle of democratic centralism. In the present epoch of acute civil war, the Communist Party will only be able to fulfill its duty if it is organized in as centralist a manner as possible, if iron discipline reigns within it, and if the party center, sustained by the confidence of the party membership, is endowed with the fullest rights and authority and the most far-reaching powers. 13. The communist parties of those countries in which the communists can carry out their work legally must from time to time undertake purges, meaning re-registration of the membership of their party organizations, in order to cleanse the party systematically of the petty bourgeois elements within it. 14. Every party that wishes to belong to the Communist International has the obligation to give unconditional support to every Soviet republic in its struggle against the forces of counter-revolution. The communist parties must carry out clear propaganda to prevent the transport of war material to the enemies of the Soviet republics. They must also carry out legal or illegal propaganda, etc., with every means at their disposal among troops sent to stifle workers' republics. 15. Parties that have still retained their old social democratic programs have the obligation of changing those programs as quickly as possible and working out a new communist program corresponding to the particular conditions in the country and in accordance with the decisions of the Communist International. As a rule, the program of every country belonging to the Communist International must be ratified by a regular Congress of the Communist International or by the Executive Committee. Should the Executive Committee of the Communist International reject a party's program, the party in question has the right of appeal to the Congress of the Communist International. 16. All decisions of the Congresses of the Communist International and decisions of its Executive Committee are binding on all parties belonging to the Communist International. The Communist International, acting under conditions of the most acute civil war, must be built in a far more centralist manner than was the case with the Second International. In the process, the Communist International and its Executive Committee must, of course, in the whole of its activity, take into account the differing conditions under which the individual parties have to fight and work, and only take generally binding decisions in cases where such decisions are possible. 17. In this connection, all those parties that wish to belong to the Communist International must change their names. Every party that wishes to belong to the Communist International must bear the name Communist Party of this or that country, section of the Communist International. The question of the name is not formal, but a highly political question of great importance. The Communist International has declared war on the whole bourgeois world, and on all yellow social democratic parties. The difference between the communist parties and the old official social democratic or socialist parties that have betrayed the banner of the working class must be clear to every simple toiler. 18. All the leading press organs of the parties in every country have the duty of printing all the important official documents of the Executive Committee of the Communist International. 19. All parties that belong to the Communist International or have submitted an application for membership have the duty of calling a special Congress as soon as possible, and in no case later than 4 months after the Second Congress of the Communist International, in order to check all these conditions. In this connection, all party centers must see that the decisions of the Second Congress are known to all their local organizations. 20. Those parties that now wish to enter the Communist International but have not yet radically altered their previous tactics must, before they join the Communist International, see to it that no less than 2/3 of the Central Committee and of all their most important central institutions consist of comrades who even before the Second Congress of the Communist International spoke out unambiguously in public in favor of the entry of the party into the Communist International. Exceptions may be permitted with the agreement of the Executive Committee of the Communist International. The Executive Committee of the Communist International also has the right to make exceptions in relation to the representatives of the centrist tendency mentioned in paragraph 7. And 21, those party members who fundamentally reject the conditions and theses laid down by the Communist International are to be expelled from the party. The same will apply particularly to delegates to the Special Party Congress. And those are the 21 conditions. As we've seen, they contain both political prescriptions and organizational or procedural prescriptions. I would say that for groups or organizations looking to set up along communist lines, the political positions are a great place to start. In other words, making sure that you are in line with those. So what do you think? Leave a question or comment below, and we will continue the discussion in the comment section as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening. And thanks to the current patrons and Buy Me a Coffee supporters whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. There are links to Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee in the video description. And remember, we can agitate and educate online, but the organizing happens in real life. So, as always, but especially for this video, make sure to take what you've learned here into your real-world political organizing. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.